For nearly 2 years, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M-0 fighter was a seemingly invincible menace. This sleek, long-range fighter packed an extraordinary punch, capable of ranging 1,600 nautical miles, armed with two 20mm cannons that delivered devastating force. Before America's successful capture and exploitation, the aircraft's capabilities profoundly affected the war's calculus. The Japanese Zero represented the pinnacle of Allied fighter opposition. On a remote, foggy island in the Aleutian chain of Alaska, this formidable reputation met a cold, desolate reality. The intelligence coup that followed, the analysis of an Akutan Zero, was destined to transform tactical knowledge, exposing fatal vulnerabilities Allied pilots could exploit. This is the story of how a single intact fighter plane stripped away the mystery of Japan's aerial supremacy, revealing secrets that allowed American fighter pilots, including Medal of Honor recipient Kenneth Walsh, to survive desperate combat against overwhelming odds. The incident began on June 4, 1942, marking the second day of Operation AL, the Japanese assault on Dutch Harbor in the Aleutians. This diversionary operation was coordinated with the much larger Battle of Midway. At the center of this pivotal event was a single young pilot, Tadayoshi Koga, merely 19 years of age. Born in Saga Prefecture in 1922, Koga was a rural carpenter's son who bypassed the elite background typically associated with Imperial Japanese Navy aviators. He had successfully completed the brutal training regimen, graduating as a flight petty officer first class aboard the aircraft carrier Ryujo. Koga flew as wingman in a three-plane section, led by Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo, with Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikata as the second wingman. The strike force included 15 Zero fighters, 11 dive bombers, and 6 torpedo bombers from the carriers Ryujo and Junyo, targeting Dutch Harbor's installations. During their assault, Koga's section became involved in a brutal aerial victory. They shot down a PBY-5A Catalina flying boat piloted by Lieutenant Bud Mitchell. The Americans successfully defended themselves, killing all 7 aircrew on board the flying boat. But American defenders on the ground fought back with overwhelming force. The defending 206th Coast Artillery Regiment used 50-caliber machine guns and anti-aircraft batteries. One bullet struck Koga's Zero, severing the oil return line between the engine and the cooler. This damage would set the stage for one of World War II's most significant intelligence breakthroughs. The anti-aircraft hit had immediate and catastrophic results. Oil began streaming backward from the engine. This visual evidence of what looked like the engine hemorrhaging was actually precious lubricant leaking away. Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga responded by manually reducing his engine speed. This crucial action temporarily throttled the engine's decline, perhaps buying him 20 minutes of flight time. Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo, his section leader, radioed instructions to Koga. The damaged aircraft was directed toward Akutan Island, located 25 miles east of Dutch Harbor. Akutan had been pre-designated as an emergency landing zone for exactly this type of scenario. A Japanese submarine was waiting offshore, poised to rescue any downed pilots. The 3 Zeros located a seemingly suitable landing area, a grassy flat half a mile inland from Broad Bight on Akutan's desolate coastline. From the air, the area looked perfect, a relatively level field composed of grass resting upon solid ground beneath. As they circled, Koga's wingman, Tsuguo Shikata, initiated his descent. On his second pass, however, he spotted something unsettling. He noticed the surface glistening among the grass stems. Shikata instantly realized his mistake. The landing spot was not solid earth, but a deceptive bog. His heart sank with the sudden, cold realization. Desperately, Koga hoped to land safely. He attempted to perform a belly landing, preparing to use the fuselage to skid across the marsh. This maneuver would typically involve retracting the landing gear. Tragically, Koga had already committed to landing. His landing gear was locked down, fixed in position, and descending toward the unforgiving landscape. The wheels touched the soft ground, instantly plunging into a combination of standing water and thick mud. With no purchase on the waterlogged bog, the landing gear dug deeply. The Zero pitched forward violently against the resisting forces. It then whipped up and over in a sickening, fatal cartwheel. The Zero skidded to rest on its back, half buried in the Alaskan marsh, with its tail pointing toward the sky. Koga died instantly. The violent deceleration snapped his neck. His body remained suspended upside down in the cockpit. His head was barely submerged in the standing water that had collected inside the inverted fuselage. Although Koga had been tightly strapped to his seat with safety harnesses to prevent injury from G-forces, that support made no difference now. Endo and Shikata circled the wreckage, verifying there was no sign of life. They had strict standing orders, disputed by post-war Japanese historians, to destroy any Zero that crashed in enemy territory to prevent capture. They made several passes but failed to sink the wreck. Leaving their comrade, they departed, hoping the waiting rescue submarine would recover Koga's body or destroy the plane. The destroyer USS Williamson patrolled the area but retrieved no one. The pristine, highly advanced Zero remained untouched, waiting in the bog for 36 days. The Zero rested in the thick, unforgiving bog for over a month. Its discovery, when it came, was entirely accidental. On July 10, 1942, Lieutenant William Bill Thies, flying a PBY-5A Catalina patrol plane, was conducting a search for a reconnaissance aircraft that had been missing in the Aleutian weather. Thies reoriented his patrol, choosing a more direct route straight across Akutan Island, intentionally flying off the typical standard paths. The sharp eyes of machinist's mate Albert Knack, the plane captain, noticed something unusual on the ground. Knack immediately alerted the crew. "Hey, there's an airplane on the ground down there," he called out, following up with the chilling confirmation. "It has meatballs on the wings." These circled the wreck several times, quickly realizing the immense potential of the discovery. The aircraft looked remarkably intact. He accurately marked the location on his maps and radioed the news back to Dutch Harbor to Lieutenant Commander Paul Foley, Jr. Foley instantly grasped the magnitude of what had transpired. While the Allies had managed to recover mangled specimens from battles in New Guinea or Pearl Harbor, this was different. In nearly 2 years of war, the Allied forces had never secured an intact, operational Zero fighter. This single wreck, resting upside down in the mud, represented invaluable potential intelligence. The very next day, July 11th, Thies returned with Knack and a Navy photographer, Arthur W. Baumann. The 3 crew members faced the unpleasant task of examining the inverted wreck. Knack, being the smallest man, climbed inside the upside-down cockpit. He had to carefully cut the safety harness to extract the pilot's body. They searched the cockpit and the pilot, Petty Officer Koga, for any intelligence materials. Koga's body was subsequently buried in a shallow grave located approximately 100 yards from the crash site. Following this grim task, Thies concluded that the airplane was indeed salvageable. The most formidable fighter of the Japanese Navy was now officially in American hands. Retrieving the Japanese prize proved to be an overwhelming ordeal, illustrating the immense logistical difficulty of the desolate Aleutian environment. The first salvage attempt was launched on July 12th, led by Lieutenant Robert Kermsey. His team, equipped with heavy gear and a dedicated scrap-wrecking derrick, faced an immediate challenge. The bog had utterly trapped the plane. Despite their efforts, they failed to move the Zero. After performing a respectful Christian burial ceremony for Flight Petty Officer Koga on a nearby knoll, they were forced to try again the next day. The second attempt was equally unsuccessful. The recovery team worked knee-deep in water and mud, constructing a skid from massive 6x6 timbers and plywood islands, hoping to provide a solid base for traction. They tried pulling the plane using the ship's delivery capability, but the plywood simply sank into the waterlogged bog. Without powerful winch and appropriate traction, the 4,000-pound fighter was immovable. The third attempt, on July 15th, finally met with success. Dedicated, proper equipment, including a crucial tractor, reached the isolated site. The team freed the Zero from the marsh's stubborn embrace, using the specialized equipment to flip the 4,000-pound aircraft right side up. They then hauled the aircraft over the marsh and onto the sandy beach. While the Zero had been dramatically impacted, the soft bog had cushioned the violence of the crash, preventing the complete destruction that would have occurred on hard ground. After cleaning the wreckage of mud and inspecting the damage, the initial assessment was encouraging. Though the vertical stabilizer was bent, and the rudder, wing tips, and flaps sustained damage, the critical components, the airframe structure, the engine, the control surfaces, and the instrumentation, were remarkably intact. The aircraft was carefully loaded onto a barge and transported to Dutch Harbor for further study. But the real shockwave hit when American technical experts examined the captured Zero in August 1942. The intelligence collected from previous combat victories was now confirmed with absolute, chilling certainty. The Zero had no armor protection. The technical specifications were stark and revealing. Pilot armor plate, none. Engine armor, none. Armored windscreen, none. Armored bulkhead, none. Self-sealing fuel tanks, none. This astonishing omission was not an oversight. It was a deliberate philosophical sacrifice. To meet the Japanese Navy's demand for a carrier fighter boasting exceptional maneuverability, 20mm cannons, and a 1,600-mile range with a 310 mph top speed, Zero designer Jiro Horikoshi eliminated every unnecessary ounce. The total weight savings compared to the F-4F Wildcat, which did carry armor and self-sealing tanks, amounted to 1,871 pounds lighter. This choice provided the Zero with its incredible speed, superior climb rate, and legendary range and maneuverability. However, the cost of these savings was devastating vulnerability. The trade-off was a dark calculus, where survival was secondary to combat performance. The realization instantly exposed the Achilles heel of Japan's best fighter. The Zero's radical lack of protection was not an accident, but a stark, deliberate choice based on a dark philosophical calculus, where combat performance superseded survival. When Allied experts examined the recovered fighter, they saw the cost of its legendary specifications. The fighter's designer, Jiro Horikoshi, faced a nearly impossible challenge back in 1937. The Imperial Japanese Navy demanded a carrier fighter boasting exceptional maneuverability, twin 20mm cannons, and an unparalleled operational range of 1,600 nautical miles, alongside a top speed of 310 mph, 10 miles per hour. To meet these extreme requirements, Horikoshi eliminated every non-essential ounce of weight. This aggressive weight saving resulted in the Zero being 1,871 pounds lighter than the American F-4F Wildcat. The aircraft utilized a specific cutting-edge alloy, extra super duralumin, an aluminum, zinc, magnesium, copper composite that provided high tensile strength. Further reduction in mass was achieved by drilling extensive lightning holes in structural brackets, and even substituting plywood for metal in certain parts of the main wing spars. This engineering philosophy achieved the demanded speed, superior climb rate, and legendary range. However, the cost was devastating vulnerability. As Horikoshi himself explained in his memoirs, Eagles of Mitsubishi, the consensus during the design phase was that the benefits of improved maneuverability and increased offensive firepower, with a lighter airframe, outweighed the risk of fighting a highly defended opponent. Consequences of this choice were devastating and often fatal. The Zero was extremely susceptible to damage. American pilots knew the aircraft would blow up in flight, or quickly become massive balls of fire when struck. The lack of armored protection for the pilot's head or torso meant that even a single .50 caliber machine gun burst could shred the structure and kill the pilot instantly. By sharp contrast, the F-4F Wildcat embodied a different philosophy. American pilots benefited from armor plates situated behind the seat, an armored windscreen, self-sealing fuel tanks, and rugged construction that utilized CO2 fire extinguishers. This design priority ensured American pilots regularly returned from combat, even with aircraft heavily damaged by enemy cannon fire. The Zero, now thoroughly documented and crated, began its journey to the mainland. On August 1, 1942, the fighter arrived in Seattle aboard the USAT St. Mihiel. From there, it traveled by barge to the Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, California, where it was immediately sequestered inside a hangar. A massive 12-foot-high stockade was erected around the aircraft, guarded 24 hours a day by armed military police. This extreme security measure was enacted not only to protect the invaluable secret from potential Japanese saboteurs, but also from overly enthusiastic American souvenir hunters who might attempt to steal pieces of the enemy's prized possession. The hadi heat stage was finally set for the intensive testing that would systematically dismantle the myth of the Zero's invincibility. Securely concealed behind the high stockade in San Diego, the Akutan Zero was not merely an object of curiosity, it was a military intelligence project of the highest order. In early September 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders received orders for a highly specialized assignment, proceeding to Naval Air Station San Diego to take charge of the captured fighter. The future of aerial combat tactics rested on his success. For 6 intense weeks, Navy mechanics labored relentlessly to transform the waterlogged wreckage into a functioning flying machine. The recovery had been hard on the aircraft, necessitating extensive and delicate repair work. Technicians straightened the bent vertical stabilizer, while the rudder, wingtips, and flaps all required careful restoration. Crucially, they performed intensive structural work on the landing struts, which had been severely sheared off during the fatal cartwheeling landing in the bog. Remarkably, the engine itself had survived its ordeal largely intact. Despite being inverted and partially submerged in standing water and thick mud for over 36 days, the cylinders were structurally sound. Mechanics were able to successfully dress and reuse the Zero's original 3-blade Sumitomo propeller. The final symbolic act of preparation was the complete stripping of the aircraft's enemy identity. The Zero's distinctive red Hinomaru roundel, the Japanese rising sun marking, was removed and replaced with the American Blue Circle White Star insignia. The Ghost in the Bog was now officially an American experimental aircraft. Then came the pivotal moment. Exactly 2 months after the Akutan Zero was accidentally discovered, on September 20th, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Sanders climbed into the enemy cockpit. He was strapping himself into the most advanced fighter the Japanese Navy possessed, an aircraft never before flown by Allied hands. He taxied out, opened the throttle, and took the captured fighter into American skies for the very first time. What Sanders would discover during this inaugural flight and the subsequent 23 detailed test flights performed through October 15th would not merely improve Allied knowledge, it would fundamentally change how American pilots approached the Pacific War. The secret of defeating the formidable Zero was finally about to be revealed. Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders' initial flights revealed immediate and fundamental truths about Japan's formidable fighter. The testing regime, covering 23 detailed test flights through October 15, 1942, exposed critical vulnerabilities that the Japanese Navy had sacrificed for speed and range. Sanders later reported that these flights covered performance tests identical to what they performed on American aircraft. The first performance tests exposed a crippling aerodynamic flaw. The aileron freeze at high speeds was immediately apparent. Above 200 knots, or about 230 miles per hour, the ailerons, the control surfaces that enabled the plane to roll, became extremely stiff. Rolling maneuvers at these high speeds were sluggish and required tremendous force on the control stick. Even more specific, Sanders discovered an inherent asymmetry. The Zero rolled much easier to the left than to the right. This specific operational detail was immediately translated into a crucial tactical advantage for American pilots. The second devastating mechanical weakness centered on the Zero's fuel delivery system. Because the Zero used a float-type carburetor, it relied on gravity to maintain proper fuel flow. When Sanders performed maneuvers that created negative G-forces, such as pushing the nose down hard in a power dive, the engine would temporarily starve of fuel, sputter, and then die. The float mechanism simply could not function under negative acceleration. American fighters, conversely, utilized pressure carburetors that operated effectively under all conditions. The comprehensive findings transformed American knowledge from assumption to certainty. Sanders' report contained a revelation that would save countless American lives. He summarized the tactical breakthrough succinctly. We now had the answer for our pilots who were being outmaneuvered and unable to escape a pursuing Zero. The strategy was simple and absolute. If pursued by a Zero, the American pilot must immediately go into a vertical power dive. By using negative acceleration, American pilots could simultaneously exploit the chance to escape the Zero's range while forcing the Zero's engine to stop running due to the negative G-forces. American pilots were instructed to initiate a hard roll to the right at about 200 knots, just before the Zero pilot could line up sights, utilizing the Zero's stiff ailerons at speed. This was not merely theory. This specific, repeatable doctrine was quickly taught to every fighter pilot deploying to the Pacific. The intensive testing regime conducted by Lieutenant Commander Sanders rapidly transformed abstract findings into a systematic, repeatable doctrine for survival. These groundbreaking results were immediately transmitted through official intelligence channels. They culminated in the Technical Aviation Intelligence Brief 3, released in November 1942, and the Comprehensive Information Intelligence Summary No. 85 in December 1942. These summaries were distributed directly to every squadron operating throughout the Pacific. They explicitly detailed the two most important characteristics American pilots needed to exploit: the Zero's slow rate of roll at high speeds and the failure of its engine to run under negative acceleration. This exploited intelligence crystallized into a revolutionary tactical framework known as boom and zoom. The doctrine was built around power and altitude, completely abandoning the slow speed, turning dogfights the Zero had been designed to dominate. The strategy was elegantly simple: gain the altitude advantage, dive at high speed toward the enemy, make a single devastating firing pass, and then use the accumulated speed to zoom climb back to altitude without engaging in circling combat. The overarching critical command issued to every pilot was to never, ever dogfight with a Zero at low speeds where its maneuverability advantage was overwhelming. The technical information was integrated into 3 life-saving instructions. Speed is survival. American pilots were told it was necessary to maintain an indicated speed of over 300 miles per hour to successfully combat the Zero. Exploit the roll. If pursued, dive to 200+ knots and execute a hard roll to the right. At speeds above 300 meters, the Zero's ailerons were frozen stiff, making it impossible for the pursuing Japanese pilot to follow the maneuver. Kill the engine. The intelligence confirmed the effectiveness of using a hard negative G pushover, which would instantly kill the Zero's engine, forcing it to sputter or seize due to its float-type carburetor system. This intellectual victory, the methodical dismantling of an enemy's strengths, began saving lives almost immediately. Individual pilots, including First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of Marine Fighting Squadron 124, directly credited the knowledge gained from Koga's Zero with their survival. Walsh, who flew the powerful F-4U Corsair, went on to destroy 21 enemy aircraft during the Solomon Islands campaign, eventually becoming the fourth-ranking Marine Corps ace of World War II. Walsh's own testimony confirmed the precision of the doctrine. In an interview, he recounted being pursued by a Zero. "With a Zero on my tail, I did a split S, and with its nose down and full throttle, my Corsair picked up speed fast. I went at least 240 knots, preferably 260. Then, as prescribed, I rolled hard right." He knew the exact speed he needed to exploit the Zero's weaknesses. Walsh was unequivocal in his assessment. "Knowing what to do with a Zero on my tail, information that came from Koga's Zero, saved my life several times." The immediate lessons learned by Lieutenant Commander Sanders were just the beginning of a systematic, institutionalized intelligence campaign. The testing program expanded rapidly. Commander Frederick M. Trapnell, the Navy's legendary director of flight testing at Anacostia, and considered the best, most experienced naval test aviator of his generation, conducted advanced comparative trials against American heavy fighters. Lieutenant Melvin C. Boogie Hoffman flew dogfighting tests between the captured Zero and newly commissioned American pilots in the newest aircraft, providing realistic combat training. These controlled trials validated the tactical prescriptions, creating doctrine that was immediately disseminated to combat units. The Zero was flown simultaneously against the P-38 Lightning, the P-39D-1 Airacobra, the P-40F Warhawk, and the P-51 Mustang. The testing confirmed exactly what Allied intelligence had already suggested. Test pilot Trapnell's assessment on October 6, 1942, was stark. The general impression of the airplane is exactly as originally created by intelligence, including the performance. To secure absolutely precise aerodynamic data, the exploitation extended far beyond test flights. On March 5, 1943, the Akutan Zero was flown to the NACA's Langley Research Center in Virginia. There, under the strictest secrecy, the aircraft underwent testing in the full-scale wind tunnel, generating specific aerodynamic data and precise performance parameters that would be used for tactical recommendations throughout the war. Crucially, the captured Zero became an unparalleled training asset. In the summer of 1944, the Akutan Zero was recalled to Naval Air Station North Island. It was used specifically as a training plane for rookie pilots being sent to the Pacific. New aviators could see the actual enemy aircraft, understand its characteristics, and, through aggressive, comparative demonstrations, grasp viscerally why the new high-speed tactics, the negative G pushover and the hard right roll, were essential for survival. While some historical accounts argue that the development of the F-6F Hellcat rendered the Akutan Zero irrelevant, documentary evidence proves otherwise. The Hellcat's core design philosophy, emphasizing rugged construction, pilot protection, and overwhelming firepower, was established early, preceding Koga's crash. Grumman completed the XF-6F specifications in February 1941. However, the Akutan Zero provided the confirmation and systematization of Allied understanding. It transformed qualitative assumptions based on battlefield scraps and pilot reports into quantitative, Chubtutwanan Sudiyutur, repeatable military doctrine. The Akutan Zero's intelligence value was not in aircraft design. It was in confirmation and systematic tactical application. The intelligence provided specific, exploitable weaknesses that the Allied command could use to secure tactical superiority. The story of the Zero, found resting in the cold Alaskan Bog, fundamentally resonates because it describes the systematic reversal of Japanese tactical superiority. The poetry of the reversal lies in how the Zero's strengths, its extraordinary maneuverability and legendary range, were achieved by eliminating every excess ounce. This design philosophy prioritized offensive performance and speed above all else, creating a dark philosophical calculus where pilot survival was secondary to combat capability. The American approach, by contrast, was built on rugged construction, heavy armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and overwhelming firepower. The F-4F Wildcat, designed around pilot protection, ensured Americans regularly returned from combat, even with heavily damaged aircraft, a luxury Japanese pilots never knew. The immense intelligence value of the Akutan Zero was not in spurring new aircraft design, but in providing confirmation and systematic tactical application. The systematic dissemination of test results provided specific exploitable weaknesses that the Allied command used to secure tactical superiority. By revealing the Zero's precise operational flaws, its slow rate of roll above 200 knots, and the catastrophic engine failure under negative G-forces, the American Navy handed its pilots a literal roadmap to survival. Dive hard and roll. Right, the aircraft continued to serve American intelligence throughout the conflict. In the summer of 1944, the Akutan Zero was specifically recalled to Naval Air Station North Island to be used as a training plane for rookie pilots being sent to the Pacific. New aviators could personally study the physical weaknesses of their enemy before ever facing it in combat. The ultimate validation of this intelligence coup comes directly from those who fought. Pilots like Medal of Honor recipient Kenneth Walsh directly credited the knowledge gained from Koga's Zero with keeping them alive during desperate combat. Walsh stated unequivocally that, "Knowing what to do with a Zero on my tail," information that came from Koga's Zero, saved my life several times. The captured aircraft served American intelligence until February 1945, when it met an ignominious end. Commander Richard Crommelin, while taxiing a Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, failed to notice the parked Zero, and the Helldiver's propeller sheared through Koga's aircraft, cutting it to pieces. The irreparable intelligence asset that survived the crash and detailed testing was destroyed in a taxiing accident. The Zero was subsequently scrapped, though small pieces were salvaged and remain in museums today. The Zero that crashed in an Alaskan bog on June 4, 1942, dramatically altered the calculus of aerial combat and helped bring its enemies safely home from battle. The young pilot, Tadayoshi Koga, died instantly. But his single, fatal mistake in landing became one of World War II's most significant intelligence breakthroughs, systematically dismantling the myth of Japan's unbeatable fighter and saving the lives of hundreds of Allied pilots. It wasn't a silver bullet in itself, but the knowledge it yielded became the single silver bullet American pilots needed to win in the Pacific skies.